revamping of our conference program to this event. We found that bringing everybody together in a general session and focusing on some really large topics is of great interest to all of you attendees. We're very pleased to start off today with renowned technology futurist Jack Shaw. He's known for his pragmatic vision. And Jack, in his career, has been a digital strategist, he's been an experienced technology executive, and a consulting futurist. And you're going to see a little bit of a common theme throughout the program where we are trying to relate the rapidly transforming technology environment to economic development and how these new tools are actually going to be deployed. So without further ado, please welcome Jack Shaw.
All right, we've got Barry next to open the program. This is the Queen Elizabeth. It is actually the QE1 for those of you that are keeping count. For 50 years in the first half of the 20th century, she and her sister ocean liners dominated the market for transatlantic business transportation. If you wanted to travel, say, from New York to London, you went by ship. Now, by the late 1930s, it actually had become possible to cross the ocean by airplane commercially. But as the executives of any of the ocean liner companies would have told you, what self-respecting business person would ever want to subject themselves to 18 to 30 hours of cramped, noisy, cold, vibrating discomfort when traveling by ship, you could ride in comfort, in fact, in luxury, and arrive at your destination in less than a week. And so it was. That was the way people crossed the ocean until August of 1957, when Pan American Airlines introduced Boeing 707 nonstop jet service from New York to London in 8 hours. And in 6 months' time, the ocean passenger transportation industry lost 90% of its customers. Disruptive technologies can have a rapid and profound impact on businesses of all kinds. And we're going to be talking about a number of disruptive technologies today. But I have learned over the years, as an emerging technology strategist, to heed the wisdom of the words of that great American philosopher, Yogi Berra, who put it so well when he said, making predictions is very hard, especially about the future. And I'll admit, sometimes my predictions are not well accepted. But I want you to imagine for a moment that it's 25 years ago. And someone were to say, well, let me tell you a little bit about what life is going to be like well within your business career. You'll be able to walk down the street carrying your cell phone in your hand. To which the person is likely to respond, you mean that great big heavy thing about the size of a concrete block with a 3-foot long antenna sticking out of the top of it? Well, yeah, they'll be a little smaller and lighter by that time. Oh, okay. Yeah, you get a call from one of your friends and they'll tell you, oh wow, I just bought the coolest product and I think you would love it too. And you say, well, send me some information on it. They hit a few buttons on their phone and a picture of the product pops up on your phone. You mean the phone has a screen on it? Whoa! Yeah, and then you take a look at it and say, oh, that is a cool product. I would like to have one of those. And you hit a few buttons and order one, and it's delivered to your house before you get home. Now, let's be realistic. Most of us don't do this every day, but we all understand that if the circumstances were to arise now, that we could. 25 years ago, what would they have done to you if you had suggested that that type of thing would be possible in anyone's lifetime? They would have brought in the guys with the white jackets and the long sleeves and carted you off to the loony bin and you'd never be heard of again. So you always have to bear in mind what level of skepticism to have about predictions of the future. I was speaking to a group of manufacturers about 20 years ago, and I was demonstrating this technology called the World Wide Web. And to do that, I logged on to what I told them was called, and I actually have a live connection to the internet, and I explained that this is what's called a website. And this particular website is run by a little startup company you'll never have heard of. They call themselves Amazon.com. And so I ordered a copy of my latest book and had it shipped to the president of the trade association, and told him that he'd get it in about a week, because of course there was no Amazon Prime in those days. And I said, so what do y'all think at the end of the presentation? And it was a group of senior level executives of large manufacturing corporations. So not a dummy in the room. There's one guy raising his hand and said, Jack, that was absolutely fascinating, but may I ask you a question? I said, sure. He said, well, what's this got to do with us? We're manufacturers. We don't sell books. Similarly, a few months later, actually, I was speaking to a technology group and talking about painting some pictures of the near future, like you're going to see in a few minutes here, and telling them what life would be like with this emerging technology called e-commerce. And afterwards, one of the fellows walked up to me and he said, Jack, he said, I love your optimism and enthusiasm about the future, but you obviously don't know very much about technology. And I said, well, I love your diplomacy. No, I didn't say that. I said, well, please, by all means, enlighten me. He said, well, we don't even really have the processing power. We may never have the bandwidth, and we'll certainly never have the security. So this notion you're peddling, that someday people are going to be able to sit at their computers and do their banking electronically online, it'll never happen. It just can't be done. And he was absolutely right at that point in time. It was another 18 months before major banks started rolling out online electronic banking. So it may be because you don't think it applies to your industry or your area, or it may simply be because you don't think it's technologically possible. But let me ask you to suspend your disbelief for just a moment and think about what some of the implications are. So I'm going to go ahead and go out on a limb and make some predictions this morning. And as this is an economic development and site selection group, I thought that it was quite sure that you would be interested in seeing these projections I'm going to be making. So for the next 2 hours, we're going to go over approximately 200 slides with detailed charts and graphs showing the impact on economic industry vertical standard metropolitan statistical area. Doesn't that sound like fun? No, students. Sorry, I don't want to take your jobs away from you. It's going to have to be up to you to draw the conclusions on this. But what we are going to do is we're going to look at some snapshots of life in the near future. Talk a little bit about the implications of omni-commerce versus more traditional e-commerce. Look at the impacts of several key transformational technologies. And wrap up by talking a little bit about digital transformation strategy, what it means for individual organizations, but also what it means for industries and some of the potential implications for economic development and site selection too. So in our first scenario, a preteen needs orthodontic work, but she and her parents don't just see the nearest orthodontist or what a friend or relative recommends. Instead, they post an online request for proposals that can only be seen by nearby registered orthodontists, and they receive several such proposals, each stating their qualifications and a suggested treatment plan. After speaking to a couple of orthodontists by phone, she and her parents select one to meet with in person. Once they've reviewed the treatment plan and payment schedule with the orthodontist, they authorize it via digital signatures on their smartphone. The family's healthcare insurance makes progress payments immediately on completion of each visit. The family makes co-payments using airline frequent flyer miles, and no paperwork is ever required. In our second scene, an aircraft is halfway across the Atlantic. When it detects that a critical part must be replaced on arrival, The airline's advanced procurement system scans the internet for FAA certified providers of the required part. The system negotiates pricing, terms, and conditions, selects a provider, and incorporates the terms into a legally enforceable online smart contract. The part's design is then downloaded to a 3D printer at the airport, and the part is waiting at the gate when the aircraft arrives. Now we're also going to see a continued move from traditional e-commerce and what's called multi-channel commerce to omni-channel commerce. Multi-channel commerce has been with us for well over a century. As far back as the late 19th century, customers of Sears Roebuck in the US could go to Sears stores to purchase items available from on-hand inventory, or they could order from a catalog they had received in the mail and have those items delivered directly to their homes. Now multi-channel commerce embraces not only stores and catalogs, but online web commerce and mobile commerce. The difference then between multi-channel commerce and omni-channel commerce is that with omni-channel commerce, the customer has a seamless experience across all channels of contact with the seller. This means that physical outlets have new roles. Whether it's a retail store, an over-the-counter facility at a distribution center, like for a company like Grainger, the physical outlet is no longer just for the sale of goods from on-hand inventory. It also acts as a showroom, a distribution point, and even in support of returned goods. This means that players in the B2B commerce marketplace or the B2C retail marketplace must have much deeper collaboration across their supply chains. To support omni-channel commerce, e-commerce sellers must have clear visibility of inventory, both on hand and available to promise, as well as of product movement. And they must understand how to take full advantage of smart infrastructure, one of the key components of emerging smart cities. Here's what I'm talking about.
The world is changing fast. Cities are growing and urban population is rising. The need for transport of people and goods are increasing, but so is congestion, air pollution, road accidents, and climate change. We need more mobility, but we have to do it in a smarter way. This is our scenario for the future. Outside the city, vehicles and autonomous trailers are operating within safe and confined areas. Electric vehicles are charged while goods are loaded. A driver enters to lead the connected convoy onto the public roads, where dedicated bus lanes should be used if possible. Autonomous connected trailers create safe, modular, and flexible vehicle convoys, adapting to transportation needs. Adjusting to schedule updates, the flexible convoy, switching goods along the way, a mobile consolidation center. The transport system is enabled through an integrated cloud platform, connecting vehicles, people, infrastructure, and logistic partners. In the city, the sensors of the autonomous refuse truck detect all movements in the vicinity of the environment and reacts automatically to any potential incidents, making sure citizens are safe and preventing accidents before they happen. Bus platooning will improve efficiency and capacity in city public transportation. With silent emission-free buses, we can bring public transport closer to people and even drive inside buildings. This opens up completely new opportunities for city planning. Fast and efficient way of charging from the electric grid at the end terminal in just a few minutes. How do we build the cities and the infrastructure of tomorrow in a more sustainable way? The future is electric. Zero emission and low noise gives the electric compact excavator access to environmental zones in the city. Imagine a silent and emission-free city. Imagine a cleaner, safer, and more resource-efficient world without compromising our everyday life and health. The future is now, and we are ready.
So what's going to make these extraordinary examples of innovation possible over the next 3 to 5 to 10 years? Certainly well within the planning horizons of economic development and site selection professionals. Well, a number of transformational technologies come into play. These include the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, and 3D printing. 3D printing is going to have a profound impact on business and industry. Already it's been used for everything from creating the world's smallest lithium-ion battery, which you can see perched on the tip of this pencil, to this 400-pound bioplastic cornerstone used for a canal house in Amsterdam. In fact, they're already 3D printing everything from concrete structures in China to human ears. It's beginning to displace a significant proportion of traditionally computer numerically controlled machining, and that's changing the landscape of manufacturing. In short run, high quality end use parts, 3D printing is beginning to emerge as a superior solution to traditional manufacturing methods. And the big engineering companies, Airbus, Boeing, GE, and so forth, have already figured this out. In fact, GE is now making titanium jet nozzles. Yes, 3D printing is not just for stuff made out of plastic. 3D printing with titanium. A single part instead of 18 means that there's no weak point, because if you're connecting 18 points with welds, one of those welds is going to be the weakest one, and it's going to give out. This is made as a single thing, so it's 5 times as durable, and because they can 3D print it with gaps where material is not needed for strength and stability, it's 25% lighter and runs cooler than material cooling structures. That means for automotive and parts manufacturing in many industries, parts can be made at dealerships and repair shops rather than at the big factory. Assembly plants can significantly reduce the need for supply chain management by making components on site as they're needed. What we could have, instead of just having a few hundred factories around the world, we might assemble cars in every major metropolitan area, because we've reduced the cost of shipping parts and materials around the country. And we're going to see 3D printing having a huge impact on virtually every single significant industry. Some of the examples that I shared with you earlier, you can begin to think about where 3D printing comes into play. Next month, I'm speaking at the American Association of Orthodontists. And they are now 3D printing not only orthodontic devices, but even false teeth. I shouldn't say false teeth. This, in turn, has interesting implications for supply chain impacts, because we're seeing a general decentralization of manufacturing and distribution, with more goods manufactured closer to the point of purchase or consumption, and that means that you will have smaller local plants more frequently rather than single large plants to serve whole countries or even continents. And that means businesses all along the supply, manufacturing, and retailing chains are going to have to rethink their strategy. As we move to 3D printing, it's not the finished parts and assemblies that will be shipped around the world. It's simply the raw materials needed to 3D print those locally. That will have huge implications for logistics and international trade. Transportation, as I said, shifting from finished product to raw materials, and because of fewer long hauls, that means lower volume may be coming in through ports. The ports that receive a lot of raw materials, we still have significant volume, but if you're 3D printing locally, items that used to be hand assembled, that means those items don't have to be assembled in the country that has the lowest labor costs in order to be able to be competitive in the marketplace. Robotics is going to have a big impact on us also. It will cause a reduction in low-wage, low-skill manufacturing jobs, but it'll be more higher-wage programming and maintenance jobs under robotics. PwC did a study a couple of years ago where they showed that, yes, we can predict from robotics in manufacturing a 28% reduction in the number of workers that are displaced by robotics, while at the same time a 35% increase in the number of workers that are working with cobots or collaborative robotics or doing maintenance, repair on the robots themselves. But even though an overall increase because of the use of robotics, an increase in productivity at the same time. Now, the challenge we've got to deal with in economic development site selection is that the people who are being displaced are not ready to simply move directly from their old low-skill, low-wage jobs they're displaced from to the high-skill, high-wage jobs that are going to be needed to maintain and manage robotic operations. There are some people out there whose philosophy is, well, it's every man for himself. Too bad. Except we can see, especially if we look at other parts of the world, like the Middle East, what happens when large numbers of people are displaced from their jobs without something. There's an economic impact on the business and on the society and the country and the region and the world. And I think ultimately what this means is that, well, yes, it's people's responsibilities to train themselves for new skills and so forth. It's also the responsibilities of the companies who are outplacing these people and of the societies and the governmental organizations to make sure that transitional education, training, and so forth is made available so that people can get the skills that they need to survive and succeed in this new environment. Because it's ironic that here we are in a situation where we're complaining about people coming into the country and taking our jobs away, and yet I talk to more executives who say we can't find enough of the right people. There ought to be a middle ground there somewhere. And there's one more very interesting technology that's not yet typically quite as well understood, even as things like artificial intelligence or 3D printing. On October 31st of 2008, at the height of the global financial crisis, just over 10 years ago, a paper was published on the internet by a person or perhaps a group of people who are still yet, as of yet, unidentified, under the pseudonym of Satoshi Nakamoto, describing how a combination of advanced cryptographic and synchronization technologies could be used to create, for the first time, a digital currency that was viable both as a means of exchange and as a store of value. The paper referred to this digital currency as Bitcoin, and the underlying set of enabling technologies quickly became known as blockchain. Now, it's important to make the distinction between, because Bitcoin was the first killer app, if you will, for blockchain technology, many people conflate the two in their minds. And confusing Bitcoin with blockchain would be a little bit like confusing email as the first major killer app on the internet with all of the thousands of other things we now do with the internet. Bitcoin is simply one of hundreds of live production applications of the underlying technology of blockchain in place already, and thousands more in development across every industry in every part of the world. In fact, by a little over 3 years ago, on the 7th anniversary on October 31st of 2015, The Economist magazine stated that blockchain was the most important advance in record keeping since the invention of the double entry bookkeeping system in Florence, Italy in 1494, more than 500 years before. So what is it that makes blockchain technology so powerful and potentially game-changing over the next 5 to 10 and more years? Blockchains do 4 key things that we haven't been able to do before. First, they allow you to create a permanent, immutable, signed and timestamped record of identity of people, places, or things. Ownership of assets, tangible or intangible, such as intellectual property, transactions, or contractual commitments. Second, blockchains allow these records to be shared among 2 or more entities, people, businesses, interested in authorized third parties like auditors, regulators, customs clearance organizations, governmental organizations, and so forth, and allow this information to be shared among all of these people without any one of them having to act as the master record keeper for the others, and without having to pay a third-party intermediary to perform that service. Third, for those who are authorized, the information becomes globally available with complete transparency to see whatever they're authorized to see. And for those who are authorized to update that with new information, to be able to do so. And for those who are not authorized, blockchain technology is essentially unhackable. Time prevents us from getting into the technical details of that, but if you'd like to follow up with me afterwards to explain why I say blockchain is for all practical purposes unhackable, I'm happy to discuss that with you. But I'll ask you to take that at face value for the moment. And some people will say, well, any computer can be hacked, right? Well, the reason that is so much more difficult with blockchain is that that information is not stored on any computer. Depending on the implementation, it's stored on anywhere from dozens to hundreds to thousands of different computers in different environments all over the world. And basically, instead of hacking into a single computer, spending hours or days figuring out the secret way in, and finally cracking through and getting into the Target credit card database or the Equifax credit records database or what have you, you would have to hack a majority of all of those computers simultaneously within seconds. It's orders of magnitude more difficult to deal with. Well, once people realized you could use blockchain for something as fungible and valuable as a digital currency, and after all these years of trillions of dollars worth of transactions, nearly a decade of them, no one has ever yet hacked the Bitcoin blockchain. They've hacked exchanges that are still centralized where Bitcoin pass keys are stored in a single location, but the Bitcoin blockchain itself has never been hacked. Well, people realize that we can use it for something like that. Why not also use it for electronic medical records so that we can finally, safely, and securely share electronic medical records? Not medical records owned by the doctor's office or the hospital, not owned by the insurance company, not owned by a big technology company like Amazon or Google, owned by you, by us, by individual people controlling their own medical records and providing access to those who need access. This doctor needs to see my medical records in order to diagnose and treat some kind of ailment or malady I've got. Great. This doctor is authorized to see them. The insurance company needs to be able to see the treatment that the doctor performed, validate that the doctor needs to be reimbursed for performing that treatment. Great, the insurance company can see this part of the records and they don't have to see any of the rest that's not relevant to their reimbursement and so forth. But not just medical records. Why not 3D printing design files? So the intellectual property in that design is protected and you have a tight control over the quantity of items that are created, and yet it's all done in a way that's much more cost effective for both the designer of the product or part as well as the marketplace that it serves. How about land titles? How many people have bought or sold real estate in the last few years? Okay, and most of you have an intimate connection with real estate in your business. Okay, imagine title searches taking place not in weeks, but in seconds. Cook County, Illinois is in the process of transferring its 5 billion land titles, third largest jurisdiction in terms of number of land titles in the United States, to the blockchain. Now, it's going to take several years, but once that process is completed, you'll have immutable complete records that will be able to be computer searched in seconds as a result of it. For that matter, why not business transactions like purchase orders? Now, what this means is that up and down the supply chain, we're going to be able to solve the big problem that we have right now. If you look at, and of course we all understand supply chains are not single dimensional chains that go from supplier to manufacturer, distributor to carrier to retailer. They're much more complex networks. But the point is, the more players you have involved in a value network or supply chain, the more errors there are, opportunities there are for errors and leakage, delays, mistakes. Each individual player has their own siloed database of information. And lots of time and money and effort is spent reconciling the information in your database with what all those of all of your trading partners are. Not so much because you think that many of your trading partners are out there intentionally trying to shortchange you or rob you, although there are a few that might be doing that, but simply because you don't want to be in a position having to trust their systems to be accurate, so accurate that you're going to make your business decisions, including what, when to pay money, for example, based on the information in their systems. So everybody's got their own systems, and then we're passing data back and forth. Fortunately, nowadays, most of that exchange of data is electronic, but it's still not real time. It's still not synchronized. With blockchain, what you have is, from a logical perspective, essentially all of the participants in a given business ecosystem sharing a common data pool, where as soon as anyone in that ecosystem does anything that is of interest to anyone else in that ecosystem authorized to know about that, that other person will see it. That information is updated and synchronized across the hundreds or thousands of nodes of that blockchain in a matter of minutes, if not seconds. So everybody has immediate transparency of everything that they're authorized to see up and down the supply chain. Am I authorized to see my customers' demand requirements for the next X period of time? Yes, assuming my customer wants to make that information available so that they can better manage inventory and logistics, for example. Am I authorized to see my competitors' price quotes to the same customer I serve? No. And using encryption technology, you can control exactly who is authorized to see what information. Well, all the information is shared evenly across the supply chain. Now, another artifact that can be stored on blockchains is what are called smart contracts. Smart contracts are much more than just a blockchain-based version of a traditional contract in a word processing format. They're actually a computer program that runs on blockchains and that can take custody over assets on that blockchain, such as funds placed in escrow in anticipation of completion of a business transaction, like a sale of a product or a project achieving a certain milestone, and that can track what has happened to date and can respond to incoming information or events. And what that means is that if you can confirm that a product that has been ordered at an agreed upon price has now been received in good condition, the smart contract can automatically generate the payment from the buyer to the seller without any human intervention required in the process. That also eliminates the need for such archaic transactions as invoices. What do we need an invoice for? If we can track the purchase order quantity, the received quantity, we know we ordered it, we agreed on the price, we got it, it's in good shape, we owe the money. The invoice actually doesn't have to be legal bearing. It's not a legal document like a purchase order is. It's simply a reminder to pay according to the terms and conditions. Let me give you an example of the impact that this can have. I had the honor a couple of years ago to be the keynote speaker at the Global Big Data Forum in Qingdao, which is a port city on the northeast coast of China between Shanghai and Beijing. And as it happens, I was aware of this a few months ahead of time, but I also a few months ahead of time started tracking a blockchain proof of concept that was taking place between some banks in Australia, the United States, and China, and some companies in the US and China, a company in Houston selling cotton to a company in China. And a couple of weeks ahead of time, I realized, in following what was going on with this planned test that was under development, that it was going to conclude with the delivery of the cotton at the port of Qingdao the weekend before the conference I was speaking at, by an extraordinary stroke of luck. When it arrived, now as most of you, many of you who are involved in international trade are probably aware, typically, even if you do have enough trust to transfer physical possession of goods that are imported into a particular country, it typically takes to affect the legal transfer of ownership of those goods, payment by the buyer to the seller of the goods, payment by the buyer to the transportation carrier, ocean freighter in this case, and so forth, and for those payments to settle out in full and irreversibly, typically takes about 10 business days. In this particular case, though, because they were able to scan the barcodes on the pallets of cotton as they arrived, while visually inspecting to make sure that the cotton appeared to be all present and in good condition. That information was then passed up to the blockchain smart contract. Ownership was transferred, all the importing reporting was completed, and all the payments were made and settled out in full, not in 10 days, but in 10 minutes. Think about the impact on cash flow and global trade. Maersk, the giant shipping company, has done studies that show that blockchain technology effectively implemented should be able to reduce the administrative costs of international trade so much that the shipping costs overall will be reduced by 15%. Because a huge amount of shipping costs is involved in all the paperwork. It's not just about the cost of building the ships and putting oil in them, it's the hundreds of thousands of people doing all of this redundant paperwork. And that reduction in cost by itself would increase global economic product by 5%. How many people recall last fall the problem that we had with romaine lettuce? Okay, all the romaine lettuce in the country was taken off all the shelves for several weeks. Was that because all the romaine lettuce in the country was bad, had E. coli in it? Of course not. It was a very, very small fraction. It was because they didn't know where it came from. And even once they figured out where it came from, they couldn't figure out where the romaine lettuce came from the farms that had the problem, or farm, whatever it was, ended up. So they had two choices, especially if you're a big company like Walmart or the big grocery store chains. You could say, well, it'll take us maybe a week or so. They've done the same thing with mangoes and other products. It'll take us a week or so to figure this all out. How many people are going to get sick in a week? What the hell? Let's roll the dice. Or they could say, this is opening us up to, it's going to cost tens of millions of dollars to pull all this romaine off the shelves, but that's nothing compared to all the lawsuits we're going to get if people start dying. So take all the romaine off the shelves everywhere in the entire country. That's what everybody did in every food grocery store chain. By tracking provenance, leveraging blockchain technology to report on the status of product in the supply chain, what exactly came from where, having them all tied together. Walmart has been through for the past 2.5 years a proof of concept that wrapped up actually in November of this past year, and they have now required that every single food supplier of Walmart, directly or indirectly in the world, must participate in this particular blockchain implementation that they've set up with the help of IBM. And the end result of that, what they were able to demonstrate, was the amount of time to figure out if there was a problem, where did it come from, and then where did all of the product that came from that location go, from just under a week to 2 seconds. Which means in 2 seconds they can say, people got sick from eating romaine at this store, that store, the other store. Where did it come from? Track it all back, figure it out. Here's the farm. What are all the stores? Here's the 5% of all of our stores that have any product from this particular location. Okay, pull all the romaine off of shelves in those stores. Everything else is fine because it came from other locations that hadn't got any problem. We're not taking any chances. And we're reducing our costs dramatically, responding much, much more quickly. This is going on through all kinds of industries. Mining of diamonds, so that when new brides get their engagement rings, they don't have to worry that they're wearing a blood diamond on their hands. Mining of minerals, like coltan, providing rare earths for electronics manufacturing, so that suddenly electronics manufacturers aren't finding themselves picketed for supporting warlords in Central Africa that are using slave labor to illicitly mine this because somebody 3 or 4 tiers up the supply chain decided to cut their costs by buying their ore or their minerals from an illicit source. And in fact, blockchain technology is going to be impacting virtually every single industry that you can think of. And these industries, in turn, have anywhere from dozens to hundreds of potential use cases of blockchain technology across that industry. You know, if we think back 20 years, we can look back and laugh right now when we think about people who were saying, well, this internet thing I get the idea of email, that makes sense, but what else would we ever do with it? I mean, people were asking that, they just weren't used to thinking outside of that box. We're in a similar situation with blockchain technology. It's not disruptive in the sense that it's instantly overnight going to change everything. But over the next 3 to 5 to 10 years, we're going to see huge changes in the functions of major industries. A lot of them are going to be disintermediating functions that are no longer required. Quite personally, I've decided I'm not going to be investing anymore in land title search companies, which make their money by paying herds of drones to go deep into dusty warehouses and paw through files of paper records to try to find out who owned this particular piece of property 3 or 4 levels back, when within the next decade, all that information will be stored on blockchains. And also meta businesses. Now, you might say, what are meta businesses? Well, meta businesses are businesses who other businesses better manage their business. Okay, so you've got people like accountants, auditors, attorneys, advertising, financiers, it goes on. They don't typically sell the end products and services that are used by people in other businesses, but they play a critical role. And their businesses are being impacted. In fact, an excellent example of that is auditing. The notion of post-auditing financial records becomes irrelevant in a blockchain-based environment. The financial records are all updated in real time, they're immutable. The information is right there in front of you. So auditing becomes much more of a process of working with companies, governmental organizations, and so forth, to help them set up the systems and implement them correctly so that they are self-managing from the beginning. And yes, of course, you would still want to periodically generate reports from the blockchain with everybody in the organization examining the detailed data every day to validate, what those results are, to check and see if somebody's financial reporting is actually accurate. Because if somebody's played with it, it's because somebody actually went in and physically changed the document that the report's printed out on, not because anybody was able to hack into the data and make changes to make their financial records look better than they might otherwise. And government has tremendous benefits from blockchains. Everything from services for citizens to make sure that they're being delivered to the right people. Identity management. We'll be able to take not only traditional designations of identity with things like driver's licenses and passport numbers and national IDs, that sort of thing, but also your own biometrics. Voice print, fingerprints, retinal scan, facial scan. And tie that back to an immutable record that you have control over who has authorization for that. So if you hire a new person, you can immediately find out exactly who this person is and authorize them with their fingerprints or their voice print to be able to have access to whatever parts of your business you want to authorize them to have access to. Benefits management. Contract management. I mean, governments are like any other organization, and in the sense of they've got to buy products and services, they've got to deal with supply chains of sorts. Regulatory compliance, being able to monitor the data, again, in real time. Some people have suggested that what we'll start to see is something a little bit more like European value-added taxes. Not that we'll necessarily move to value-added taxes per se, but the legitimate taxes collected as a byproduct of business activities and transactions can be automatically collected in real time as those transactions take place, rather than waiting on companies to report what they say is those amount of transactions and then to pay, hopefully voluntarily and accurately, what they actually owe. We'll be able to monitor that more closely. Disaster recovery would be very, very important. And one of the most interesting impacts on society that blockchain can have is the idea of blockchain-based voting.
The time has come to bring voting into the 21st century. Let's be honest, no one likes searching for their polling place, waiting in long lines when they arrive. And when the ballots are cast, can we even be sure they get counted correctly? We can do better. And at Follow My Vote, we figured out just how to do it. We threw out all preconceived notions about the way voting is done today and imagine how it should be done tomorrow. It was immediately clear that an honest election needs to be verified from end to end, so there was no choice but to bring it online. Leveraging blockchain technology in combination with elliptic curve cryptography, we've broken open the ballot box to allow everyone to count the votes, all without compromising privacy or security. Instead of waiting in line, imagine voting from the comfort of your own home on your own device, and even following your vote into the ballot box to confirm that it was cast as intended and counted as cast. Online voting. You want it, you got it. Finally, online voting. Follow my vote. Pass it on.
So what do you think the impact on the percentage of people who cast ballots would be if all of us could vote at home? We could vote at any time in, say, the last 90 days before the election, and yet even after having cast our ballot, if we decided later we wanted to change our vote, we could change our vote right up until the final deadline for counting ballots, and we would know that our vote was counted the way we cast it, and we would know that nobody else would be able to know how we voted. And again, we wouldn't have to go out in the rain and stand in a long line to do that. We would also eliminate what little actual voting fraud there is, if any. Now, one of the challenges is there are going to be a lot of politicians out there who are not really very excited about the idea of having everyone who should be authorized to vote being able to easily cast their ballots. They would like to make it easy only for certain people who vote the way that they would like them to vote. Those people will be fighting against this kind of thing. But ultimately, it's a potentially powerful move toward a much more highly enabled level of democracy. We're already beginning to see blockchain-based voting and ballot counting that has taken place in locations like Lithuania, Sierra Leone, and Georgia. Now, unfortunately, I'm not referring to my home state of Georgia. I'm referring to the Western Asian country of Georgia. But I think we're going to see it, and we're beginning to see some awareness, especially among some of the state and local governments, that this may be a way around some of the conundrums that we have, the concerns about voting machines and ballots and so forth. So lots of exciting stuff going on. Oh, sorry, I'm going backwards instead of forward.
It's time.
And as Bill Gates put it so well some years ago, people always overestimate the changes that will occur in the next 2 years and dramatically underestimate the changes that will occur in the next 10. Don't let yourself be lulled into inaction because you don't think everything that you might eventually be able to do with the technology is going to be fully available in the next 18 to 24 months. Of all people, economic development, site selection people need to be thinking in long-term horizons. We all have to act in the short term, but we should be thinking in the long term. So there's very exciting opportunities coming along and exciting ways to think about how are these emerging technologies going to enable new ways of doing business? What are the impacts, kinds of impacts that we can see? Where are we going to see whole new industries like ride sharing and room sharing that didn't even exist 15 years ago cropping up? And where are we going to see industries that get blockbustered? It's all very exciting, but none of it matters unless you have a strategy for digital transformation. For those of you that are on the site selection side, that means that strategy needs to be part of your company's strategy. Is your company thinking, if you're a manufacturer, for example, you're thinking about how 3D printing is likely over, if you're going to select a site that you're going to do business at for the next 20 or 30 or 50 years, have you thought through how 3D printing might impact your manufacturing process and what that means in terms of where, what size of site, and so forth, and how many sites you select? If you're in economic development, have you thought through what patterns of manufacturing, distribution, and retailing there are out there and how those might change? Digital transformation is not about force-fitting new technologies into existing businesses. It's about rethinking business models and even business ecosystems. It's not about making current ways of doing business marginally more efficient. In the late 90s, when internet and web technologies began to emerge and people began to think about how those could be used to help manage supply chains faster and more efficiently, especially for retailers. And some people thought, boy, you know, when I want to buy music and I go into my local music store to buy my CD, I think I'm very cool because I'm not buying that old vinyl stuff. And those people in music stores, boy, if they use this World Wide Web technology effectively, they can dramatically reduce the amount of inventory they have to keep on hand. They can replenish it more quickly. They can lower their carrying costs. They can respond more quickly to changes in demand in the marketplace. That would be really cool. That is applying technology to make your current model marginally more efficient. Steve Jobs looked at it differently. He said, with the internet and the World Wide Web, I'm not sure we need the retail music store anymore. And except for those of us who want to occasionally go and buy an old vinyl record, we don't have retail music stores anymore because all of our music is downloaded or streamed. That's digital transformation. That's impacting an industry tremendously. So think about how new technologies could affect businesses, industries, ecosystems, and then how those technologies would be applied to achieve their business objectives. Now, blockchain does have a key role in this, because particularly at the industry ecosystem or supply chain level, it's blockchain that provides the digital, decentralized infrastructural glue to tie all these things together. So they're all working on shared information, as they're authorized to do. All these other technologies are very important, but they take impact at specific points, either geographically or functionally from a process perspective. And that's why blockchain has a key role in helping rethink the way ecosystems work. The biggest hurdles to blockchain adoption and really emerging technologies in general, a big study was done a couple of years ago by a major IT services company showing that the top things that are keeping organizations from moving ahead as they would, as quickly as they would otherwise, understanding it, communicating it to key executive decision makers, evaluating cost benefits and use cases. None of these are technical constraints. None of these are, we can't do it because the technology won't let us do X. Now, just as 20 years ago, we couldn't do everything with internet technology that was envisioned by some people that we are doing today, we can't do everything today with blockchain technology that we'll be able to do in 5 or 10 or 20 years. But the technology is evolving much faster than businesses and organizations and nonprofits and governments are able to adapt to their business processes and models to take advantage of. So the excuse that there might be some particular little thing that the technology doesn't quite support yet, so we shouldn't pay any attention to it at all, is just that, it's an excuse. It means organizations need to be planning for the future and they need to start that process now. So facilitating digitally enabled economic growth means, first, awareness, communication. Simply got to communicate that these technologies are out there. They're coming faster than most people recognize. Because unless you're working directly in the field, you may not be aware of how widely in use 3D printing is in manufacturing, or blockchain is, particularly in areas like financial services. Last year, HBSC Bank out of China processed over $250 billion worth of transactions via blockchain. I'm not talking about using digital currencies like Bitcoin to move money around. I'm talking about facilitating traditional transactions like letters of credit. Industry groups and trade associations need to actively work with people like economic development corporations and their site selection industry company members to help them understand how these emerging technologies are going to impact their businesses, metro and state chambers of commerce, and so forth. Then the strategy and planning part comes into place. I would recommend that each of you, from the perspectives you can bring, encourage your state and local governments to be actively investigating these. I would ask your representatives, your legislators, and your executives, What are you doing about 3D printing? How are we addressing smart cities? What are we doing about Internet of Things and blockchain? Who's looking into it? What dedicated resources have you set aside? If I'm doing site selection, these are the kinds of questions I'm going to be asking regional, state, and local economic development groups about. If I'm going to move my operations to a new city, I'm going to want to make sure that that city and its infrastructure and its operations, or region or state or what have you, are smart enough to support the way I anticipate digitally operating my business in the future. All this is going to require a lot of change. Starts with a change in mindset. We've got to understand that the days of, well, when are we going to get done with this IT revolution are over. We're never getting done with it. In fact, change is accelerating. So we've got to recognize that change is your friend. It's not enough to simply passively say, I'm willing to accept change. You've got to proactively go out and look for change, not just change for change's sake. It means you've got to look for those changes that are going to help your business or your region or state or local area, what have you, benefit the most. And look for those changes. Think about changing how processes work and the impact of those on business and economies, how business models work, how business ecosystems work, and how they may be changed in the future. That's a lot of change. But as the late, great historian Henry Steele Commager put so well over a century ago, change by itself does not necessarily assure progress, but progress implacably requires change. I encourage you to make the changes that you need to make in your thought processes, in your organizations, your areas, and your industries, to take full advantage of these exciting new technologies and help us move on much more successfully into the 21st century. If I can be of any help to you with that, it would be my pleasure. Thank you so much for listening.
Jack, for a compelling and insightful presentation. We have time for a few questions, and I want to start the ball rolling. In economic development, one of our prime functions is to bring jobs to the community.
Right.
We evaluate projects and the value of incentives in terms of how many jobs they create. What is your prediction? All of these technologies that you described bring tremendous efficiencies that eliminate jobs.
In some cases, yes.
Well, I kept thinking about blockchain and all of the bookkeepers in the world disappearing. What is your prediction on whether and how we're going to be able to square the circle of embracing these changes, but not losing the ability to create jobs?
What you bring up, Jack, is a very interesting and important social challenge that we have to deal with. Because in the long term, these new technologies will create way more jobs, more challenging, interesting, and much more highly remunerative jobs than the ones that they cost. If you went back 150 years and you talk to leading economists, business people, governmental executives of the day, and you told them, I guess, well, let's go back before the Civil War, let's say 170 years. At a time when 2/3 of the people in the United States spent full time raising the food to feed the whole country. Only 1/3 of the people in the country did anything other than raise crops and raise animals for food. And you had said, in another century or so, all the people in the country will be fed by just 2% of the population. They would have said, it's going to be an economic disaster. Oh, what are we going to do with 68% of the people in the country out of work? Well, as we know with 2020 hindsight, of course, that didn't anticipate the industrial revolution, the electrical revolution, the computer revolution, the internet revolution, any of these things. I think most of us would argue that the quality of life standard of living is vastly higher than it was 170 years ago. The same thing's going to be happening over the next generation or 2 or 3 as these technologies get more fully insinuated into our lives. The challenge we have to deal with is in the short term. And it's not so much, as I referred to earlier, that a bunch of jobs are going to go away now and the others won't come until later. It's that we have a mismatch between the jobs and the skills that are needed and the skills that are available for the people who have the existing jobs. So how do we make that transition? And I think what is going to be really important is for business leaders and government leaders to come up with well thought through plans to help facilitate those transitions as smoothly as possible, so that from the perspective of individual people, we have a safety net while they get retrained into new skill sets and new jobs. And from the perspective of the economy and the society as a whole, we're doing those things that will help to encourage long-term economic growth. You guys are the economic development professionals. You know better than I, really, what some of those might be, but I think those are some issues, and I think that was an excellent question, Jack. The gentleman here has a question.
I'm thinking in terms of the federal government's ability to enforce laws. When I think of Enron, there were hundreds of thousands of transactions, not in one place, but in their headquarters at power plants and so forth. And I'm thinking to myself, an excellent presentation, thank you. And I'm thinking to myself, the Department of Justice probably issued 1, 3, or 5 subpoenas to get into Enron and figure everything out. With blockchain, is the government now going to have to issue like 1,000 subpoenas to go in and examine each one of these nodes of information? Or what do you
No, because what happened, okay, that's a good question, so let me clarify. The information on each node is identical to what's on every other node. Every node contains the entire data set. That's why I said logically, from a technical perspective, yes, the information is across hundreds or thousands of nodes, but each node contains the entire data set. If somebody were to hack into that node and change it, the synchronization technologies that tie all those nodes together would immediately pinpoint, wait a minute, that node doesn't have what all the rest of us have. Ignore the information on that node. It's not valid anymore. And whoever was accessing data from that node within their systems would have to redirect to look at the other nodes with the valid data on it. This is a continuous process of updating and validating these processes. But secondly, what you would likely have in this type of situation, if you implement an industry blockchain, is that as part of it, the industry would agree, yes, there are groups like auditors, and there are state, local, and federal regulators that are authorized to see information on this blockchain, certain information. Not necessarily every regulator or every auditor is authorized to see all the information, because that may not be what they're authorized to regulate or hired to audit. But what they are authorized to see, they can see, and they'll be able to see it in real time. They won't have to ask for a subpoena. They'll already have access to the information in real time that they're authorized to have access to. And so it'll be a different scenario. Now, yes, in some cases, the law may have to, the letter of the law may have to catch up with the combination of business practice and technological capabilities. So there is some evolutionary processes there. There are a number of state and local governments already that are really moving out in the lead on two of the ones. Delaware, in terms of everything that they do with stocks and so forth, is rapidly moving to support blockchain-enabled things like shareholder voting, for example. The state of Wyoming, small economic impact, but they're taking a very leading position in looking at how blockchain technology can be used to facilitate businesses and reporting and so forth. We're going to see more and more of that going on. So you bring up an excellent point. A lot of it has to do with the way that businesses, industries, governmental organizations at all levels coordinate together in the development and implementation of these blockchain technologies. It's not going to be overnight, like suddenly jet planes appearing and decimating the shipping business. But over the next several years, certainly over the next 5 to 10 years, it's going to have an equally impactful set of changes in the capabilities. Yes, sir.
I've got to follow up on the first question. You brought up the Industrial Revolution as an example to compare the technological revolution to. At that point, we were replacing muscle power with machines, but there's some evidence that now what we're doing is replacing cognitive dexterity power with machines and robots and artificial intelligence. Is there any evidence, in your opinion, that this time is really different than last time?
That it's going to be any different from last time?
Yeah.
You know, the thing that I think makes the biggest impact on me is the fact that it is the combination of artificial intelligence and human capabilities that is really what's going to be emerging. So I had a chance to speak to a group of accountants a few weeks ago, and one of the points I made to them was that accountants are not going to be replaced by AI systems. Accountants who know how to use AI as a tool will replace those accountants who don't. Same thing with collaborative robotics. People who know how to work with systems. What they're finding is that the most efficient systems on manufacturing floors are a combination of people and robots working together. So people do the tasks that they do better than robots, and robots do the tasks that require strength and speed and competitive capabilities they can do better than people. Much better than just fully automated systems. In fact, another example of that is, Magnus Carlsen from Sweden is the world chess champion currently. And somebody interviewed him a while back, and they said, would you ever play against chess against a computer? He said, I use my computers to practice my chess all the time. He said, no, would you ever compete against a computer? Like when Garry Kasparov played against the IBM specialized computer Deep Blue 20 years ago, it was the first time a computer beat a grandmaster champion in chess. Well, now Magnus Carlsen looks at that and says, why would I want to do that? Do you ask Usain Bolt if he would have a race against a drag race or automobile? What's the point? Of course not. He said the computer would destroy me every time. I can't possibly compete, but there is something that can beat the fastest supercomputers in the world. Excuse me, I should say the best chess playing supercomputers in the world. What beats them is a team of a skilled chess player. It doesn't even have to be a grandmaster, but a master level chess player playing using a computer. It doesn't have to be a supercomputer. It's just going to be a standard laptop-based chess game computer. And those two, what they call collaborative computing capabilities, can beat the top supercomputers because you're combining the human creativity and intuition, insight, and experience with the number crunching capability of the computer together. So my point is, that's where there's opportunities for people to continue to have a role, is by working with AI systems if it's in the back office, with robotics if it's out on the factory floor, distribution, logistics, that sort of thing. Jack, I'll let you pick.
We have time for one, maybe two more questions.
Okay.
A while ago, we were seeing almost irrational exuberance with Bitcoin. And a lot of people were investing heavily in that. And I think the Lost twins made $1 billion with their exchange and everything going on there. Where do you see Bitcoin right now? It fell off down a little bit. Where do you see that going now?
Yeah, interestingly, everybody hear the question about Bitcoin? Interestingly, Bitcoin and digital currencies in general in the last 6 weeks have gone back up by about 20%. But I think that long-term digital currencies more broadly will continue to be a store of value, particularly one that's independent of fiat currencies. Okay? It may not surprise you, but perhaps you might not be aware of this, but right now the country that's got the largest percentage of Bitcoin transactions in the world per population is Venezuela. Because they can't depend on their fiat currency anymore. And they can't get other currencies out of the country. Bitcoin, they can get out of the country right on the internet. And so, of course, obviously, Maduro is trying to crack down on people's internet connections to keep them from doing that. But every time gold goes up, Bitcoin goes up because it represents the same kind of thing. Now, when it comes to transactions, I think over time, we'll see more payment money transactions taking place via digital currencies. And I can remember when I was a kid, my dad said, the man pays his bill with cash or a check drawn on a hard, supported, strong bank account. None of this plastic foolishness. Of course, 5 years later, he had his first credit card, thought he was Mr. Cool. But, you know, we saw back in the 70s and 80s, the adoption suddenly made them pay for things with these pieces of plastic. Now we take it a second hand. I think we'll see digital currencies as a fourth form of payment emerging over the next decade or so. But Bitcoin and digital currencies are a little bit of a sideshow, quite frankly. In the late 1990s, I could tell when irrational exuberance was really taking place, because at the end of my presentations about the internet and World Wide Web, and how they could affect business, how we could have things like e-commerce and so forth, I would say, or the host would say, what questions do we have? The first 6 hands that went up would all be, which internet stock should we buy? Because people weren't thinking about how are we going to use these new technologies to manage our businesses and our affairs more effectively. They were thinking about, how can I personally get rich quick? Okay, well, sorry if you didn't happen to guess right and get in on the internet. I mean, you know, you could buy one of these search engine things, or 20 different ones. Who would guess which one? You know, if you bought Lycos or Atomy or something like that, you don't have any money. You're lucky enough to guess one called Google. What a goofy name that is.
Yeah.
Okay, one more question.
One last question.
This is a comment for the local economic developers. The number one limiting factor working, I hope you agree with me, with Bitcoin, with blockchain recruiting of the facilities is your electrical grid. They use an awful lot of electricity. They want it all at once, and they're not interested in dual service, and they want triple service, and they want total connection at 100% of the time. So at the local level, when you're looking at your strategy, there are very few not just pad ready, but grid ready sites in America that can take a large blockchain number crunching facility.
Well, you bring up an excellent point. So let me try to clarify that. When it comes to the Bitcoin blockchain, when it was first designed about 10 years ago, they didn't anticipate the demand of volume of transactions that would take place, and the underlying functional design is inefficient for that reason. So one of the big issues that a lot of people at the leading edge of blockchain technology is, how can we use different forms of consensus algorithms on the blockchain in order to be able to perform the same encryption and consensus management synchronization capabilities in ways that do not require. Right now, the Bitcoin blockchain by itself consumes more electricity than the entire country of Argentina worldwide. And so obviously this is not sustainable in the long run. And so they're looking at developing blockchains that are much more efficient, that don't require these giant amounts of computing power. So Bitcoin mining itself will continue to. In China, they have whole warehouses that are built right next to hydroelectric power plants for that exact reason. But, so it's an important question to ask. If you have the opportunity for blockchain capabilities, because I thought at first you were going to say finding people with blockchain skill sets, and that's also a bit rare at the moment. But if you have these kinds of opportunities, ask them, is this using the old Bitcoin technology that does require huge amounts of electricity, or is it using other kinds of electricity that's not going to have a measurable impact on our overall electrical grid within our area, region, whatever. So excellent point to bring up. You have my contact information. I'm sorry I've got to run very quickly after this session wraps up, but please feel free to reach out, connect to me on LinkedIn, join the Blockchain Executive LinkedIn group, drop me a note, or even give me a call if I can be of help to any of you. It would absolutely be my pleasure. Thank you again very much for the opportunity to do this morning.